Yogāsana quiz. Number 1. Yogāsana vocabulary based on the Yoga Wellness Instructor course syllabus from the Yoga Certification Board, District of AYUSH. Let us start. The first question, what is the Sanskrit name for mountain pose? Question second, which pose is known as tree pose? Tree pose. Question third, which pose is called downward facing dog pose? Downward facing dog pose. Question fourth, which pose is called bow pose? Bow pose. Question fifth, which pose is known as cobra pose? Cobra pose. Question sixth, which pose is called child pose? Child pose. Question 7th, which pose is called corpse pose? Corpse pose. Question 8th, which pose is known as warrior 1? Warrior 1. Question 9th, which pose is known as warrior 2? Warrior 2. Question 10th, which pose is known as triangle pose? Triangle pose. Question 11th, what is the Sanskrit name for raised arms pose? Raised arms pose. Question 12th, which pose is known as Ardha Chakrasan? Ardha Chakrasan. Question 13th, what is the Sanskrit name for hands to feet pose? Hands to feet pose. Question 14th, which pose is known as Parshva Konasana? Parshva Konasana. Question 15th, what is the Sanskrit name for standing spinal twisting pose? Standing spinal twisting pose. Question 16th, which pose is known as Dandasana? Which pose is known as Dandasana? Question 17th, which pose is known as Padmasana? Padmasana. Question 18th, what is the Sanskrit name for thunderbolt pose? Thunderbolt pose. Question 19th, which pose is known as auspicious pose? Auspicious pose. Question 20th, what is the Sanskrit name for frog pose? Frog pose. Question 21st, which pose is known as camel pose? Camel pose. Question 22nd, what is the Sanskrit name for hare pose? Hare pose. Question 23rd, which pose is known as upright frog pose? Upright frog pose. Question 24th, what is the Sanskrit name for seated forward bend? Seated forward bend. Question 25th, what is the Sanskrit name for upward plank pose? Upward plank pose. Question 26th, which pose is known as twisted pose? Twisted pose. Question 27th, what is the Sanskrit name for the half Lord of the Fishes pose? The half Lord of the Fishes pose. Question 28th, which pose is known as cow face pose? Cow face pose. Question 29th, what is the Sanskrit name for crocodile pose? Crocodile pose. Question 30th, which pose is known as locust pose? Locust pose. Question 31st, what is the Sanskrit name for wind releasing pose? Wind releasing pose. Question 32nd. Which pose is known as raised leg pose? Raised leg pose. Question 33rd. What is the Sanskrit name for half plow pose? Half plow pose. Question 34th. Which pose is known as bridge pose? Bridge pose. Question 35th. What is the Sanskrit name for easy fish pose? Easy fish pose. Question 36th. Which pose is known as psychic union pose? Psychic union pose. This is it for the first quiz. Please follow for the detailed explanation of all the questions. Alternatively, you can check the comment box. I have put the answers of all the questions in the comment box. Keep on practicing. Namaskar.